Hey everyone, tonight I've got some absolutely wild stories pulled straight from the depths of Reddit, perfect for drifting off to sleep. Our first story comes from someone who discovered that their family member has some very creative theories about wedding planning and financial responsibility. I got engaged 6 months ago to my partner of 4 years. We're both in our late 20s, financially stable, and excited to start planning our wedding. Nothing extravagant, just a nice celebration with family and friends. We decided on a budget of $20,000, which we're paying for ourselves. No contributions from parents, no loans, just money we've saved specifically for this purpose. We wanted to keep it simple and avoid any family drama about who's paying for what. My sister got married 3 years ago. She had a much bigger wedding, around $50,000, mostly paid for by our parents. It was beautiful, and she was happy, but it wasn't really our style. We wanted something smaller and more intimate. 2 weeks after we announced our engagement, my sister called and said she needed to talk to me about wedding planning. I figured she wanted to share advice or offer to help with vendor recommendations. She came over and pulled out a binder. Inside were copies of all her wedding invoices, vendor contracts, and payment receipts. She'd organized everything by category with tabs and highlights. She explained that since our parents had paid for most of her wedding, there was now a family wedding debt that needed to be balanced. According to her calculations, our parents had spent $38,000 on her wedding, which created an inequity in family wedding contributions. She'd done math showing that if our parents contributed nothing to my wedding, they would have given her $38,000 more in wedding support than they'd given me. She believed this needed to be corrected. I pointed out that our parents hadn't offered to contribute to my wedding, and we weren't expecting them to. We were paying for it ourselves. She said that didn't resolve the inequity issue. She'd created a proposal where our parents would give us $38,000 to match what they'd spent on her wedding. We could use it however we wanted, but the contribution needed to happen to maintain family fairness. I asked if she'd discussed this with our parents. She said no. She wanted to present it to them together as a united front. She'd written a script for how we should approach the conversation. I told her I wasn't going to ask our parents for money to match her wedding budget. She seemed surprised and asked why not. I explained that we didn't need the money and hadn't expected any contribution. She said it wasn't about need, it was about fairness. Our parents had set a precedent by funding her wedding, and maintaining equal treatment required them to provide equivalent support for mine. I said our parents helping her didn't obligate them to give me the same amount. She disagreed strongly and showed me articles about equitable inheritance and family financial equality. She'd done actual research on this. She had printouts from legal websites about equal treatment of adult children and the importance of balanced family contributions. I explained that wedding gifts weren't inheritance, and our parents could choose to help or not help with different events. She said allowing such a large discrepancy would damage family relationships. She wanted to schedule a family meeting to present the equity proposal. I declined. She asked if I was comfortable with our parents showing such obvious favoritism. I said it wasn't favoritism. Her circumstances were different. She'd asked for help, they'd chosen to provide it. My circumstances were different. I hadn't asked, they hadn't offered. Both situations were fine. She spent the next hour trying to convince me that I was entitled to matching funds and should demand them. She'd calculated interest on the $38,000 to account for the 3-year time difference. According to her math, our parents actually owed me $42,000 to truly balance the family wedding support, accounting for inflation and opportunity cost. I asked her to leave. She said she'd proceed with the equity proposal on my behalf, since I was clearly too uncomfortable to advocate for myself. 2 days later, my parents called. My sister had sent them a formal written request for wedding equity compensation. She'd included all her calculations, the researched articles, and a payment schedule showing how they could transfer the funds. My parents were confused and asked if I'd put her up to this. I explained the whole situation and said I absolutely had not asked for money and didn't expect any. They were relieved, but also concerned about my sister's perception of family fairness. They asked if I felt slighted that they'd helped her, but not me. I said I genuinely didn't care. Different circumstances, different choices, everything was fine. They said they appreciated my understanding, but were worried about my sister's reaction. My sister called that evening, angry that I'd undermined her equity proposal. She said our parents had told her I didn't want the money, which made her look like she was creating problems. I said I wasn't undermining anything, I was just being honest about my situation. She said my refusal to accept fair treatment was enabling our parents' favoritism. She'd created a whole framework about family financial equity, and I was destroying it by not participating. If I didn't demand equal treatment, it validated unequal distribution of family resources. I told her this was about wedding money, not some philosophical debate about family finances. She said everything was connected, and my acceptance of inequity had broader implications. She stopped speaking to me for 2 weeks. Then she sent an email with a revised proposal. Since I wouldn't accept direct payment, our parents should establish a family equity fund that would distribute the $38,000 over time through various gifts and support. She'd outlined scenarios where our parents would help me with future purchases, like a house or car, to eventually equal out the wedding contribution discrepancy. I replied, saying I didn't want our parents tracking some running total of support to make sure everything balanced perfectly. She said my casual attitude toward family fairness was disappointing. My parents eventually told her directly that they weren't going to implement any equity balancing system, and that their choice to help with her wedding didn't create an obligation for my wedding. She wrote them a letter explaining how their position was creating lasting family division and damaging sibling relationships. The letter was 6 pages long with citations. My parents ignored the letter. My sister brought it up at every family gathering for months. She'd referenced the wedding equity gap in unrelated conversations. At Thanksgiving, she mentioned that she was grateful our parents had valued her wedding enough to support it financially, making pointed eye contact with me. At Christmas, she gave our parents a framed photo from her wedding with a note thanking them for their generosity, again with emphasis clearly directed at the contribution amount. I got married 2 months ago. We had a beautiful wedding within our budget. My parents attended and were happy for us. They gave us a generous gift of $2,000 as a wedding present. My sister sent me an email the next week noting that our parents' gift brought the total family wedding contribution gap to $36,000 in her favor. She'd updated her equity tracking spreadsheet to reflect the new numbers. She said she'd be monitoring future family financial interactions to ensure the gap was eventually addressed. She's created a shared document where she tracks every gift our parents give to either of us. Last month, our parents bought me a birthday dinner that cost about $100. My sister logged it in her tracking spreadsheet and sent an updated equity report showing the contribution gap had narrowed to $35,900. I haven't looked at her spreadsheet in weeks. I'm happily married, our wedding was perfect, and I'm not interested in monitoring family gift equity balances. My sister is still sending monthly equity updates. The most recent one noted that our parents had sent her flowers for her anniversary, which increased her lifetime gift total by $75. She's been tracking this for almost a year now. Every birthday card, every holiday gift, every dinner check picked up by our parents, all logged, categorized, and calculated toward the family equity balance. I asked her last week if she planned to track this forever. She said, until the discrepancy was resolved or our parents acknowledged the inequity, yes. That story is over. The dedication to tracking family gift equity down to individual birthday dinners and flower deliveries, complete with monthly spreadsheet updates and cited research papers, is genuinely impressive in the most exhausting way possible. Some people really will create elaborate accounting systems to quantify family relationships, then wonder why everyone finds it uncomfortable. Speaking of people who quantify things that shouldn't be quantified, this next story involves a roommate who apparently believes household contributions require precise mathematical measurement. I've been living with my current roommate for about 10 months. We found the apartment together, signed the lease together, and set up a pretty standard shared living arrangement. Split rent 50-50, alternate weeks for shared chores, keep common areas clean, basic roommate stuff. My roommate is an engineer. Very analytical, detail-oriented, likes systems and processes. This is generally fine and sometimes helpful when dealing with apartment logistics. About 4 months ago, she suggested we optimize our household contribution balance. I asked what she meant. She said she'd been tracking our respective inputs to the household and noticed some imbalances she wanted to address. She pulled out a spreadsheet showing every grocery purchase either of us had made for the past 3 months. She'd categorized items by who consumed them, who paid for them, and calculated a running balance of household food contributions. According to her tracking, I owed her $47.32 for shared groceries she'd purchased that I'd consumed disproportionately. I looked at the spreadsheet. She'd logged everything. Individual yogurts, portions of milk, estimated bread slice consumption. She'd been weighing and measuring food usage for months. I asked when she'd started tracking this. She said from the day we moved in. She'd just waited to compile enough data before bringing it up. I said I hadn't been tracking my consumption at all and had no way to verify her numbers. She said that was fine. She had detailed records and I could trust her calculations. She showed me her methodology. She'd weighed containers before and after I used shared items. She'd counted individual servings of things like cereal and calculated costs per ounce. For items like milk, she'd been marking the container level with tape after she used it, then measuring how much was gone when I used it next. She'd converted this to fluid ounces and applied the per ounce cost. I asked if she'd seriously been measuring milk consumption with tape marks. She said it was the most accurate method she could implement without installing flow meters. She'd considered installing measuring devices but decided manual tracking was sufficient for current purposes. She showed me photos she'd taken of tape marks on various containers documenting the measurement system. I stared at these photos of our milk carton with measurement tape, trying to process that my roommate had been conducting beverage consumption analysis. I asked why this was necessary. She said, household equity required accurate tracking of resource consumption. Without data, we were just guessing at fair contribution levels. I said I thought we'd been splitting groceries reasonably by just alternating shopping trips and buying shared items. She said that system assumed equal consumption, which her data showed wasn't accurate. She'd calculated that I consumed about 12% more shared groceries than she did. Over 3 months, this created the $47 discrepancy she'd identified. I asked if she wanted me to pay her $47. She said that would resolve the current imbalance, but she'd prefer to implement an ongoing tracking system to prevent future discrepancies. She showed me an app she'd found for roommate expense tracking. It had features for logging purchases, dividing costs by custom percentages, and generating automatic payment requests based on consumption patterns. She'd already set up our account and entered 3 months of historical data. All I needed to do was download the app and start logging my consumption going forward. I said I wasn't going to track every time I ate a piece of shared cheese or drank some milk. She asked how I expected to maintain household equity without data. I suggested we just keep doing what we've been doing because it seemed to be working fine. She said it seemed fine because I wasn't tracking the imbalance I was benefiting from. She'd graphed our consumption patterns over time, charts showing my usage of shared items trending higher than hers. Projections of annual cost discrepancy if patterns continued. According to her analysis, by the end of our lease, I would have consumed approximately $230 more in shared groceries than I'd paid for. I asked if she'd considered that maybe I bought things she consumed too, and we were roughly balanced overall. She said she'd accounted for that in her tracking and the numbers showed otherwise. She'd been tracking both directions. Every item I bought, she logged what portion she consumed. Every item she bought, she logged what portion I consumed. The net result was my 12% overconsumption. I didn't know how to argue with someone who'd been weighing yogurt containers for 3 months. I paid her the $47 just to end the conversation. She seemed pleased and said this resolved the historical balance. Now we could start fresh with proper tracking going forward. I didn't download the app. I bought my own groceries separately from that point on. She could track her own consumption of her own food. This worked for about a week before she noted that I was using shared utilities at imbalanced rates. She'd been tracking electricity usage by monitoring when lights were on in different rooms. She'd installed power monitoring devices on outlets without telling me, little devices that tracked energy consumption of anything plugged into them. She showed me the data. My bedroom used more electricity than hers because I kept my computer running at night. The living room used more power during hours she'd determined I was primarily occupying the space. She'd calculated that I was responsible for 57% of the electricity bill based on tracked usage patterns. Our current 50-50 split was undercharging me by 7%. I asked if she'd installed monitoring devices throughout the apartment without my permission. She said they were just collecting data, not invading privacy. She needed accurate information to ensure fair utility distribution. I told her to remove the monitoring devices. She said they were helpful tools for household resource management. I said they were invasive and weird. She agreed to remove them but said we'd need some system for tracking differential utility usage. She suggested estimating based on time spent in shared spaces and individual bedroom device inventories. I said we were keeping utilities split 50-50 like normal roommates. She said normal didn't mean equitable. She started timing how long I spent in the bathroom. She'd note when I went in and when I came out. She was calculating water usage based on shower duration and toilet flush frequency. I caught her writing down times in a small notebook she kept in the living room. I asked what she was tracking now. She showed me logs of bathroom usage patterns. She'd been recording this for 2 weeks. She had my average shower length calculated to the minute. She'd noted patterns in when I used the bathroom and was building what she called a water consumption profile. I told her to stop tracking my bathroom usage. She said she was nearly done collecting baseline data and then she'd just maintain the patterns without active monitoring. I asked what the point was. She said once she had complete household consumption data, she could calculate precise equity percentages for all shared expenses. She showed me her vision for the final system, a comprehensive tracking spreadsheet that would calculate my exact responsibility for rent, utilities, and shared supplies based on actual usage data. She estimated I should be paying about 54% of rent because my bedroom was slightly larger, about 57% of utilities based on consumption patterns, about 61% of shared household supplies based on usage rates. I currently paid 50% of everything. She'd calculated that I was underpaying by approximately $93 per month. She wanted to implement the new cost distribution system starting next month. She'd already created the invoice template showing the adjusted amounts. I told her absolutely not. We had a lease agreement for 50-50 split and that wasn't changing. She said the lease didn't specify utility and supply distribution methodology. I said industry standard was equal split unless otherwise agreed. She said industry standard wasn't optimized for equity. We argued about this for an hour. She kept showing me data. I kept saying I wasn't paying different amounts based on her tracking systems. Finally, I told her I'd be moving out when the lease ended in 2 months. She asked if this was because of the equity tracking. I said yes. I wasn't interested in living with someone who measured my shower duration. She seemed hurt and said she'd only been trying to ensure fairness. I said fairness didn't require monitoring devices and bathroom logs. She asked if I'd be willing to stay if she stopped active tracking and just used estimates. I said no. The fact that she thought this was normal behavior meant we weren't compatible as roommates. She said most people would appreciate her attention to detail and commitment to equitable cost distribution. I said most people would find it invasive and exhausting. I moved out 6 weeks ago. She sent me a final invoice for the last month of shared expenses calculated using her full tracking data. The total was $178 for my portion of utilities and supplies. I sent her $86, exactly half of what normal utility and supply costs would be. She sent me a detailed email explaining why the tracking-based calculation was more accurate. I didn't respond. She sent 3 follow-up emails with additional data supporting her methodology. I blocked her number. Last week, she left a package at my new apartment. Inside was a printed report of our entire 10-month roommate period, with complete consumption data, cost calculations, and a final accounting showing I'd underpaid by a total of $412. There was an invoice for the outstanding balance, and a note saying she'd be willing to accept a payment plan if I couldn't pay the full amount immediately. I threw the whole package away. I'm not paying someone for retroactive yogurt consumption measurements. That story is over. The commitment to installing secret power monitoring devices, timing bathroom usage, and measuring milk consumption with tape marks, all in service of calculating roommate equity to the exact dollar, is impressively unhinged. Some people really will turn basic cohabitation into an engineering project, then act surprised when their roommate finds it creepy. Speaking of engineering solutions to non-problems, this next story involves a gym that apparently believes fitness requires algorithmic optimization. I joined a gym about 8 months ago. Standard commercial gym, decent equipment, reasonable monthly fee, convenient location. Nothing special, but it met my needs for basic workouts. The gym was independently owned by someone who'd recently sold a tech startup. He'd mentioned in promotional materials that he was bringing innovative technology to the fitness industry. I figured this meant maybe some app integration or digital workout tracking. Seemed fine. Most gyms have some kind of tech component now. The first few months were normal. I went 3 or 4 times a week, used the equipment I liked, did my routine, standard gym experience without any issues. Then the owner announced they were launching what he called the optimal fitness algorithm. He sent an email to all members explaining that they'd been collecting data and were ready to implement personalized optimization. The email said the gym had been monitoring equipment usage patterns, tracking member workout sequences, and analyzing fitness outcomes. They'd developed an algorithm that would provide personalized workout optimization for maximum results. I thought this meant they'd offer suggested routines based on your goals, optional recommendations you could choose to follow or ignore. That seemed potentially useful. The following week, I showed up for my usual workout and scanned my membership card at the entrance. Instead of the normal beep and green light, the turnstile stayed locked and the screen displayed a message. The message said, "My membership card was locked pending my mandatory optimization assessment." I needed to check in at the front desk to complete the onboarding process for the new system. I went to the desk and explained that I just wanted to work out normally. The staff member said everyone needed to complete the optimization assessment before accessing equipment. The assessment took 40 minutes. Questions about my fitness goals, medical history, workout preferences, schedule availability, then measurements of height, weight, body composition, flexibility, and strength baselines. They had me demonstrate my current workout routine while they filmed it. The staff member noted my form, counted my reps, timed my rest periods. Everything was logged into their system. At the end, she said my optimization profile was complete and my personalized algorithm would be ready within 24 hours. Until then, I couldn't access the gym. I asked why I couldn't just work out while waiting for the algorithm. She said unoptimized workouts could interfere with the baseline data they'd collected. I needed to wait for my personalized program. I left frustrated but figured I'd come back the next day when the system was ready. The next evening, I scanned my card and the turnstile opened. The screen displayed a message saying my optimization algorithm was active and I should proceed to my first assigned station. I went to the cardio area planning to use a treadmill. When I approached one, the screen showed a red X and a message that this equipment wasn't part of my current optimized routine. I tried a different treadmill, same red X and locked screen. I tried the elliptical, also locked. I went back to the front desk and asked why the cardio equipment was locked. The staff member checked my account and said cardio wasn't included in my optimization algorithm today. My program started with strength training. I explained that I always did cardio first to warm up. She said the algorithm had determined a different optimal sequence based on my goals and performance data. She pulled up my assigned workout on her screen. I was supposed to start with leg press, then move to specific sequence through 6 other strength machines, then finish with exactly 12 minutes of rowing. No treadmill, no elliptical. The algorithm had decided these weren't optimal for me today. I asked if I could just do my own workout instead of following the algorithm. She said the equipment was now programmed to only activate for members doing their optimized routines. If I wanted to use a machine that wasn't in my current program, I'd need to request an algorithm adjustment through the app. Adjustments were reviewed weekly and required justification. I downloaded the app and looked at my assigned program. It was completely different from my normal routine. Different exercises, different order, different timing. I tried to submit an adjustment request to add cardio. The form asked for detailed justification, including why I believed cardio was necessary despite the algorithm's recommendation. I wrote that I liked doing cardio and wanted to include it in my workout. The form rejected my submission, saying the justification needed to include specific performance or health reasons. I rewrote it, explaining that cardio was important for cardiovascular health. The form accepted this and said my request would be reviewed by the optimization committee. Meanwhile, my current program was already loaded and waiting. I could either do the assigned workout or not work out at all. I tried doing the assigned program. The first machine was leg press. I approached it and the screen activated showing my name, the prescribed weight, rep count, and rest period. I loaded the weight and started my set. Halfway through, the machine beeped and a message appeared saying I was performing the movement too quickly. I needed to slow down to match the optimal tempo. A countdown appeared on screen showing the prescribed pace for each rep. Down for 3 seconds, up for 2 seconds. The machine wouldn't count reps that didn't match the timing. I finished the set following the tempo. The screen said I had exactly 90 seconds of rest before the next set. A countdown timer started. I sat there watching the timer. At 80 seconds, the screen warned me to prepare for my next set. At 90 seconds exactly, it told me to begin. I did 3 more sets with the machine monitoring my tempo and enforcing rest periods. Then it told me to move to the next station in my program. The next station was a shoulder press machine. I got there and the screen was locked, showing a message that I'd arrived 43 seconds late. My rest periods would be adjusted to compensate for the delay. I did that exercise, then moved to the next one. The screen there showed I was now 2 minutes behind my optimal program timeline. It recommended I skip my water break to get back on schedule. I took a water break anyway. When I returned to the next machine, it had automatically adjusted my program, removing one of my later exercises to account for the time deficit. This continued through the whole workout, every machine monitoring my form, counting my reps, timing my rest, constant feedback about my pace, my technique, my adherence to the program. After my last exercise, I was supposed to do exactly 12 minutes of rowing. I got on the rowing machine and it started a countdown. It monitored my stroke rate and power output, beeping when I deviated from the prescribed intensity. I finished the 12 minutes and the machine told me my workout was complete. My performance data had been logged and analyzed. My next program would be available tomorrow. I looked at the stats on screen. The algorithm had rated my workout performance at 73% optimal. I'd been too slow on transitions, my form deviated on several exercises, and my intensity didn't match prescriptions. I went home exhausted and frustrated. I'd just spent 90 minutes being micromanaged by machines. The next day, I logged into the app to check if my cardio request had been approved. It showed as denied. The optimization committee had determined that cardio was not aligned with my stated goals at this time. My stated goals, according to the system, were muscle building and strength gain. I didn't remember stating these specifically, but they must have been inferred from something in my assessment. I tried to update my goals in the app. The option was locked. Goal modifications required a reassessment appointment which cost $50 and had a 2-week waiting list. I looked at my next assigned workout, completely different exercises from the previous day. The algorithm was varying my routine based on recovery data and optimization parameters I couldn't see. I stopped going to the gym. I still had 6 months left on my annual membership, but I couldn't handle working out under algorithmic supervision. 2 weeks after I stopped attending, I got an email from the gym. The algorithm had noticed my absence and flagged my account for optimization failure. The email said members who failed to follow their programs were undermining the system's ability to learn and improve. If I didn't resume optimized workouts within 1 week, my membership would be converted to a higher tier that included mandatory compliance monitoring. I replied saying I wanted to cancel my membership. They said annual memberships couldn't be canceled, but I could freeze my account for a $20 monthly fee. I paid to freeze my account rather than deal with the compliance monitoring tier. I joined a different gym that lets me use whatever equipment I want in whatever order makes sense. The old gym still sends me emails about my optimization algorithm. Apparently, it continues updating my theoretical program based on data from similar member profiles. Last month, I got an email saying my algorithm had been upgraded to include nutrition optimization. If I reactivated my membership, I'd be enrolled in the meal tracking program that would integrate with my workout optimization. I unsubscribed from the emails. They kept coming from different addresses, each one explaining new features of the optimization system and encouraging me to return. I blocked their domain. They started sending physical mail with QR codes that linked to my updated algorithmic workout programs. I threw the mail away. Last week, someone from the gym called asking if I'd experienced technical difficulties with the system. They wanted to help troubleshoot why I'd stopped attending. I explained I didn't want to be told when to rest between sets by a machine. The caller seemed confused and said the optimization system was designed to maximize results. I said I'd rather have suboptimal results and enjoyable workouts. She said that didn't make sense from a fitness perspective. I hung up. That story is over. The evolution from normal gym to algorithmic micromanagement system that locks equipment, monitors rep tempo, denies cardio requests, and flags members for optimization failure is genuinely dystopian. Some business owners really will convince themselves that maximum technological control equals better service, then wonder why people prefer basic gyms that let you just work out. Speaking of technological control systems, this next story involves a landlord who apparently believes property management requires extensive surveillance infrastructure. I've been renting my current apartment for about a year. It's a small building, only 6 units, owned by an individual landlord who lives in one of the units. When I moved in, he seemed like a pretty hands-off property owner. The lease was standard, rent was reasonable, building was well maintained. He fixed things quickly when needed and otherwise left tenants alone. Good landlord setup. About 4 months ago, he sent an email to all tenants explaining that he was implementing some building improvements. He said he'd be installing security cameras in common areas for everyone's safety. This seemed reasonable. A few cameras in the hallways and parking area made sense for security. Several tenants had mentioned package theft concerns. The camera installation happened over a weekend. When I left for work Monday morning, I noticed cameras everywhere, not just in hallways and parking areas, but positioned at every door, every window, every corner of the building. There were cameras pointed at individual unit doors from multiple angles, cameras covering every inch of the parking lot with overlapping fields of view, cameras in the stairwell on every landing. I counted at least 20 cameras on my walk to my car. For a 6-unit building, this seemed excessive. That evening, I found a note from the landlord explaining the new building security system. The cameras were all connected to a central monitoring system that he'd be reviewing regularly. The note said the cameras were for everyone's protection, and asked tenants to be mindful that all exterior movements were now recorded for security purposes. I thought it was overkill, but cameras in common areas weren't technically a privacy violation. I just made sure my curtains were closed and continued my normal routine. A week later, I got an email from the landlord asking me to be more careful about closing the building's exterior door. He said his security review had shown me leaving the door open for several seconds on 3 occasions. He'd included timestamps and attached short video clips of me going through the door. In each clip, I'd held the door open maybe 5 seconds while I grabbed something from my car. The email requested that I ensure the door closed completely before walking away to maintain building security. I replied, saying I'd be more careful. I was slightly creeped out that he was reviewing footage in enough detail to notice 5-second door delays. 2 days later, another email. This one noted that I'd been parking my car at a slight angle in my designated parking spot. He'd attached aerial view footage from a camera showing my car not perfectly aligned with the painted lines. He requested that I park more carefully to maintain organized parking lot appearance. I looked at the attached image. My car was maybe 10 degrees off perfect, perpendicular, barely noticeable. Definitely not blocking anyone or creating any actual problem. I replied, saying I'd try to park more carefully. I was starting to realize he was watching the camera footage extensively. Over the next few weeks, I got regular emails about minor security footage observations. I'd taken my trash out at 11 p.m., and he noted that was later than typical trash removal hours. I'd had a friend visit, and he'd counted how many trips we'd made carrying things to my apartment. One email noted that I'd left for work 17 minutes later than my normal departure time on a Tuesday. He asked if everything was okay because the scheduled deviation was unusual. I didn't respond to that one. I was disturbed that he was tracking my departure times closely enough to notice a 17-minute variation. I started paying attention to the cameras more carefully. I realized there were cameras positioned to see directly into my windows if my blinds were open. Cameras angled to monitor individual parking spots from multiple views. I sent the landlord an email asking about the camera angles and whether any could see into units. He replied, saying the cameras were only monitoring common areas, and any incidental viewing into apartments through windows was unavoidable for complete coverage. I closed my blinds completely and kept them closed. I didn't want cameras potentially recording inside my apartment. A few days later, the landlord knocked on my door. He said he'd noticed on security footage that my blinds had been closed continuously for 4 days. He was checking to make sure everything was okay. I said everything was fine, I just preferred privacy. He said keeping blinds closed during the day was unusual, and he wanted to ensure there wasn't a problem. I explained that I was uncomfortable with cameras that could potentially see into my apartment. He seemed offended and said the cameras were for security, not surveillance. I pointed out that monitoring my window blind status was surveillance. He said he'd noticed the change during his routine security reviews and was following up on unusual patterns. I asked how often he reviewed the security footage. He said he checked it multiple times per day to stay informed about building activity. I asked if he was watching live feeds or just reviewing recordings. He said both. He had the feeds up on monitors in his apartment and would check periodically throughout the day. He explained that as a property owner, he had both the right and responsibility to monitor his building. The cameras helped him identify maintenance needs, security concerns, and unusual activities. I said I understood security monitoring, but his level of observation felt excessive. He disagreed and said proper property management required detailed awareness of building operations. The conversation ended awkwardly. I went back to my apartment feeling watched. That night I invited my partner over. We ordered food delivery and ate dinner in my living room with the blinds closed. The next morning, I had an email from the landlord. He'd noticed unusual activity at my apartment the previous evening, including a food delivery and an extended visitor. He asked if I'd had a party or gathering because building rules limited the number of overnight guests to one person without prior notification. I replied that I'd had one dinner guest who'd left at 10 p.m. No party, no overnight guest, just a normal evening. He responded saying his security review had noted the visitor's vehicle in the parking lot for 4 hours and 15 minutes. He wanted to ensure I was aware of the guest notification requirements. I checked my lease. There was no guest notification requirement. He'd made that up. I replied, pointing out that the lease didn't require guest notification. He said it was an unwritten building courtesy that he expected tenants to follow. I started documenting everything. Every email, every camera I could identify, every interaction about the surveillance system. I contacted a tenant rights organization and described the situation. They said extensive surveillance of common areas was legal, but monitoring that extended into units or became harassing could be problematic. They suggested documenting the pattern and potentially consulting with other tenants to see if anyone else was experiencing similar issues. I talked to my neighbors. Every single one had stories. One tenant had been questioned about their exercise routine because the landlord noticed them leaving in gym clothes at inconsistent times. Another had been asked about a package delivery because the landlord wanted to verify what they were receiving. He'd noted the box size and sender information from the security footage. A third tenant had been questioned about visitors, with the landlord providing specific counts of how many people had entered their apartment over the past month. We all compared notes and realized he was conducting detailed surveillance of every tenant, tracking our schedules, counting our visitors, noting our activities. We hired a lawyer together and sent a formal letter requesting that the landlord limit his security monitoring to actual security purposes and stop the invasive behavioral tracking. The landlord responded with his own lawyer, stating that property owners had broad rights to monitor their buildings and he was operating within legal parameters. The situation escalated. He started sending more detailed observation emails. Lists of every time we'd entered or exited the building, with timestamps. Visitor logs with vehicle information. Activity reports noting deviations from our normal patterns. 3 of us moved out when our leases ended. I found a new apartment in a building with a management company that doesn't send emails about parking angles. I heard from a former neighbor that the landlord installed even more cameras after we left. Apparently, he's now up to over 40 cameras for the 6-unit building. He's also started using facial recognition software to automatically log tenant and visitor identities. The remaining tenants are looking for new places. That story is over. The progression from reasonable security cameras to 40-camera surveillance system with detailed activity tracking, schedule monitoring, and behavioral analysis emails is genuinely alarming. Some landlords really will convince themselves that obsessive monitoring equals good property management, then act confused when tenants flee. Speaking of obsessive monitoring, this next story involves a manager who apparently believes remote work requires military-grade oversight. I've been working remotely for about 3 years now. My company went fully remote during the pandemic and decided to stay that way permanently. It's been great for work-life balance and productivity. My team has always been pretty autonomous. We have clear goals, regular check-ins, and good communication. Management trusted us to get our work done without constant oversight. 6 months ago, we got a new manager. He'd previously worked at a company with a very different culture, more focused on metrics and monitoring. He mentioned during his intro meeting that he liked data-driven management. This seemed fine initially. Data can be useful. I assumed he meant analyzing project outcomes and team performance metrics. 2 weeks after he started, he sent an email introducing a new productivity tracking system. He said he wanted to better understand team workflow and identify optimization opportunities. He asked us all to install monitoring software on our work computers. The software would track active time, application usage, and work patterns. Several team members expressed concerns about privacy. He assured us the software only monitored work-related activities during business hours and the data would be used for supportive performance optimization. I installed the software reluctantly. I didn't love the idea of monitoring, but figured if it was just tracking work time versus idle time, it wasn't too invasive. The first week seemed normal. I worked my regular hours, attended my meetings, completed my projects. Everything felt the same. Then I started getting emails from my manager about my activity patterns. The first one noted that I'd taken a bathroom break that lasted 6 minutes during a work hour. He asked if I was experiencing any health issues that required extended breaks. He wanted to ensure I had the support I needed. I replied that I'd just used the bathroom and the break was normal. He said 6 minutes was above the team average of 3.5 minutes, and he was monitoring for patterns. I didn't know how to respond to my manager tracking bathroom duration. I deleted the email and tried to ignore it. 2 days later, another email. This one included a graph showing my keyboard activity throughout the day. There were several gaps where my typing had stopped for more than 5 minutes. He'd highlighted these gaps and asked me to explain what I'd been doing during periods of keyboard inactivity. I looked at the timestamps. The gaps were when I'd been reading documents, thinking about problems, or taking notes by hand. Normal work activities that didn't involve typing. I explained this in my response. He said reading and thinking should still involve some mouse movement or screen interaction. The complete lack of computer activity suggested I might be distracted. He asked me to try to maintain more consistent engagement with my computer, even during reading or thinking time. I asked how I was supposed to show computer engagement while reading a document. He suggested scrolling periodically or moving the mouse to indicate active attention. This was absurd. I wasn't going to randomly scroll or move my mouse just to create activity signals for monitoring software. The next week, I got a detailed activity report. It showed my keyboard strokes per hour, mouse clicks per hour, applications accessed, and websites visited. He'd highlighted several instances where my activity had dropped below what he'd calculated as the team productivity baseline. One highlighted section was a 40-minute period where I'd had very low keyboard activity. He noted this as a significant productivity gap. I checked the timestamp. That was when I'd been on a phone call with a client. I explained this, and he said I should have been taking notes during the call, which would have shown computer activity. I had been taking notes in a physical notebook. He said digital notes were preferred because they created trackable activity data. He was asking me to change how I worked to generate better tracking metrics, not to actually improve my work quality. I started getting daily activity reports. Every report highlighted something: gaps in typing, mouse movement below team average, application usage that didn't align with my project assignments. He scheduled a meeting to discuss my productivity trends. He showed me graphs comparing my activity levels to other team members. According to his analysis, I was in the bottom 30% for keyboard activity and the bottom 20% for mouse interactions. He was concerned about my engagement levels. I pointed out that I'd completed all my projects on time and met all my deadlines. My actual work output was strong. He said output was important, but activity metrics provided insight into efficiency and engagement. High output with low activity suggested I might be capable of even more with proper engagement optimization. I asked what engagement optimization meant. He said I should aim to maintain consistent computer activity throughout the workday, minimize gaps, and increase my interaction frequency. I asked if he was telling me to work faster. He said he was telling me to work more consistently with more measurable engagement indicators. The monitoring got worse. He started tracking how quickly I responded to messages. If I didn't reply to a chat within 5 minutes, I'd get a follow-up asking about my availability. He implemented a system where we had to log our activities in 30-minute increments throughout the day. What project we were working on, what specific tasks we were doing, all documented in real time. If the logged activities didn't align with the computer monitoring data, we'd get emails asking to explain the discrepancy. I logged that I'd been writing a report. The monitoring showed low keyboard activity during that time. He asked why writing a report didn't generate more typing data. I explained that writing includes thinking, outlining, and revising. Not just constant typing. He said effective writing should show consistent keyboard engagement. Several team members quit. They found jobs at companies that didn't track bathroom duration and mouse movements. I started looking too. The monitoring was making me anxious and affecting my actual productivity because I was worried about generating sufficient activity metrics. In a meeting, he introduced webcam monitoring. He wanted us to keep our cameras on during all work hours so he could verify we were at our computers. He'd noticed that activity monitoring couldn't confirm we were actually present during low activity periods. Webcam monitoring would fill this gap. Multiple team members objected. This was too invasive. He said, remote work required additional verification methods, and webcam monitoring was standard practice. It wasn't standard practice. He'd made that up. Half the team threatened to quit if webcam monitoring was implemented. He backed down on that specific requirement, but added more activity tracking instead. We now had to log every break, every time we stepped away from our computers, every call or meeting that didn't show up in the monitoring data. We had to take screenshots of our work every hour and upload them to a shared folder for verification that our logged activities matched our actual work. The screenshots had to show enough detail that he could confirm we were working on what we'd logged, but not so much detail that we exposed sensitive information. Finding the right balance for screenshot detail became its own time-consuming task. I accepted a job offer at a different company last month. During my exit interview, HR asked why I was leaving. I explained the monitoring situation. They seemed surprised and said they'd look into it. I heard from former teammates that HR investigated and found our manager had implemented monitoring systems that exceeded company policy. He was told to scale back the tracking. Instead, he quit and took a job at a company that apparently shares his philosophy about productivity monitoring. I'm at my new job now. No activity tracking software. No keyboard stroke monitoring. No bathroom duration analysis. My manager here trusts us to do our work and judges us on actual results. It's revolutionary. That story is over. The descent from reasonable remote work into keyboard activity tracking, bathroom duration monitoring, screenshot requirements, and attempted webcam surveillance is genuinely dystopian. Some managers really will convince themselves that measuring mouse clicks per hour equals effective leadership, then wonder why their entire team quits. Speaking of leadership failures, this next story involves a volunteer organization that apparently believes charity work requires corporate hierarchy. I've been volunteering at a local animal shelter for about 4 years. It's a small nonprofit, mostly volunteer-run, focused on rescuing and rehoming abandoned pets. The work is rewarding, and the atmosphere has always been pretty casual and friendly. We have maybe 20 regular volunteers who handle different tasks. Some people do dog walking, some handle adoptions, some work on fundraising. Everyone contributes what they can based on their skills and availability. The shelter is managed by a small board of directors who handle the business side and legal stuff. They've always been hands-off with volunteers, trusting us to organize ourselves and get the work done. Last year, one of the board members stepped down and was replaced by someone with a corporate background. She'd been a director of operations at a large company and was excited to bring professional management practices to the shelter. At first, this seemed potentially helpful. Better organization and planning could improve our efficiency. She started by sending an email to all volunteers introducing a new organizational structure. She'd created formal departments with designated leaders and reporting hierarchies. I was assigned to the animal care department, under a department head who would report to her as director of volunteer operations. My specific role was Animal Care Associate Level 2. I'd been doing the same tasks for 4 years, walking dogs, cleaning kennels, feeding animals. Now I had a formal title and a supervisor. The email included an organizational chart showing all the departments, positions, and reporting relationships. It looked like a corporate structure chart for a Fortune 500 company. We were a volunteer animal shelter with 20 people. The department head for animal care was someone who'd been volunteering for 6 months. She'd been chosen based on her management experience at her day job, not her animal shelter experience. She called a meeting for everyone in our department. 7 of us showed up. She distributed printed agendas and said she wanted to establish departmental goals and performance metrics. She asked us each to define our key performance indicators for animal care activities. I said I didn't have KPIs, I just tried to take good care of the animals. She said we needed measurable objectives to track departmental success. She wanted each of us to commit to specific metrics like number of dogs walked per shift or kennel cleaning completion times. I explained that the number of dogs walked depended on how many dogs we had, how many other volunteers were available, and what each dog needed. It varied constantly. She said we needed to establish baseline metrics anyway. She'd created a template for us to log our activities during each shift so we could analyze productivity patterns. The templates were extensive. Time in and out, tasks completed, resources used, obstacles encountered, improvement opportunities identified. We were supposed to fill these out at the end of every volunteer shift. I asked why we needed to log all this. She said data-driven decision-making was essential for organizational effectiveness. Several longtime volunteers stopped showing up. They'd been volunteering to help animals, not to fill out productivity reports. The director of volunteer operations noticed the declining volunteer attendance and scheduled one-on-one meetings with everyone to discuss engagement. My meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes. She had a list of questions about my volunteer satisfaction, career development goals within the organization, and interest in leadership opportunities. I explained that I didn't have career development goals for a volunteer position. I just liked helping animals. She said that attitude might be limiting my growth potential within the organization. She asked if I'd considered pursuing the Animal Care Associate Level 3 position. I didn't know there was a Level 3 position. She showed me the updated organizational chart. There were now 5 levels within animal care, each with different responsibilities and requirements. To advance to Level 3, I needed to complete training modules, demonstrate mastery of core competencies, and receive supervisor approval. I asked what the benefit of advancing levels was. She said, higher levels got priority scheduling and increased responsibility. I already had as much responsibility as I wanted. I volunteered a few hours a week to walk dogs. I didn't need priority scheduling or increased responsibility. She seemed disappointed and made a note in her file about my limited advancement interest. The next week, we got an email announcing mandatory volunteer training. The director of volunteer operations had developed a comprehensive onboarding and development program. All existing volunteers needed to complete the foundational training modules within 30 days to maintain their positions. The training was online, self-paced, covering topics like organizational values, volunteer code of conduct, safety protocols, and performance expectations. I started the training. The first module was 90 minutes long and covered the shelter's mission statement, vision, and core values. I'd been volunteering there for 4 years. I understood the mission. The second module was about professional conduct in volunteer settings. It included sections on dress code, communication standards, and workplace behavior. The dress code section specified that volunteers should wear closed-toe shoes, avoid ripped clothing, and maintain a professional appearance. I'd been wearing jeans and t-shirts to clean kennels for 4 years. Nobody had ever mentioned a dress code. The third module covered safety protocols. Some of this was actually useful information about handling animals safely, but it was buried in an hour-long presentation that mostly covered liability concerns and incident reporting procedures. I spent 6 hours completing the mandatory training. At the end, there was a quiz I had to pass with 80% or higher. The quiz included questions about the organizational chart, the volunteer code of conduct, and specific policies from the training modules. I failed the quiz. I'd apparently missed important details about the chain of command and the proper procedure for reporting schedule conflicts. I had to retake the training modules and try the quiz again. I passed on the second attempt. My completion certificate was emailed to my department head and the director of volunteer operations. The following month, we got new scheduling requirements. Instead of just showing up when we were available, we had to submit availability requests through an online portal 2 weeks in advance. The department heads would review requests and approve schedules based on departmental needs and volunteer performance ratings. Performance ratings were calculated based on our logged activities, attendance reliability, training completion, and supervisor assessments. I'd never had a performance rating in 4 years of volunteering. Now I had a numerical score that determined my scheduling priority. My first rating was 72 out of 100. The breakdown showed points deducted for inconsistent activity logging, below-average completion metrics, and limited advancement engagement. I'd been doing the exact same volunteer work I'd always done. Now I had a mediocre performance score, because I hadn't filled out enough forms. 3 more long-time volunteers quit. The shelter was now running short on people to actually care for the animals because everyone was busy with training, logging activities, and attending departmental meetings. The director of volunteer operations sent an email about the staffing challenges. She said we needed to recruit more volunteers and asked everyone to refer friends who might be interested. She'd created a formal recruitment presentation and asked us all to complete ambassador training so we could effectively represent the organization to potential volunteers. The ambassador training was 4 hours long and covered messaging frameworks, organizational talking points, and recruitment best practices. I didn't complete the ambassador training. I barely had time for my regular volunteer hours after all the mandatory meetings, training modules, and activity logging. The shelter started posting volunteer job listings on employment websites. The listings included detailed position descriptions, qualification requirements, and application procedures. To volunteer at an animal shelter, you now needed to submit a formal application, participate in multiple interview rounds, complete background checks, and finish a comprehensive training program. The application process took 3 weeks minimum. New volunteer recruitment dropped to almost zero. Nobody wanted to go through a corporate hiring process to volunteer their time. I stopped volunteering about 2 months ago. I'd been doing it for 4 years because I enjoyed helping animals. I didn't enjoy being an animal care associate level 2 with performance ratings and mandatory training modules. I heard from a friend who still volunteers occasionally that they've now implemented a volunteer performance review system. Every volunteer gets a formal review every 6 months with their department head. The reviews assess competency levels, goal achievement, and development progress. Volunteers with low review scores get put on performance improvement plans for a volunteer position at an animal shelter. The organization has lost about 70% of their regular volunteers since the new structure was implemented. They're struggling to maintain basic operations because nobody wants to volunteer anymore. But they have impressive organizational charts and comprehensive training programs. Very professional. That story is over. Well, there you have it. Another night, another collection of stories that prove reality is definitely stranger than anything we could make up. From family members tracking gift equity with spreadsheets to landlords installing 40 surveillance cameras, these tales remind us that somewhere out there, someone is probably measuring something that absolutely doesn't need to be measured. Whether you're here for the background noise, dealing with insomnia, or just enjoying the chaos of other people's lives, I hope these stories helped you unwind or at least made you feel better about your own situation. If your biggest problem today was a gym that monitors your rep tempo or a volunteer organization with performance reviews, well, at least you're not alone in dealing with completely unreasonable people. Thanks for sticking around through all these wild tales. If you enjoyed tonight's collection, consider subscribing because I've got plenty more where these came from. Sweet dreams. And remember, somewhere out there, someone is probably filling out a productivity report for walking a dog at an animal shelter.